Hi, I'm Rob Price, and I'm talking to CEOs about AI. Welcome to Futurize.
I'm Mark Boost, the CEO and founder of Civo. And Civo is a cloud provider. And we're founded out of the UK. And we were set up 7 years ago to challenge the hyperscale cloud providers with a more fair and open cloud ecosystem. And we've been championing sovereignty in the UK, but also globally as well for a number of years. And that's been picking up a lot of traction recently, which I'm happy to talk about.
Mark, great to have you on the podcast, and I think, great to have you dialed in from the US today as well. So, yes, kind of we spoke when you were in the UK, but one of the things that I was interested was that point that you have to look at sovereignty through the lens of different geographies that you're operating out of. What is sovereign AI to you in terms of let's start with the UK. What's sovereign AI in the UK from your perspective?
Yeah, and I think it's important, firstly, is to say that there's no official definition of sovereignty, and I think sovereignty happens to mean a lot of different things to different people, and I think that's part of the problem. And at Sivo, we've been trying to help define more clarity around that, and I always come from it of the direction of transparency, and I think that's what's really important. Um, no matter what people's definition of sovereignty, we should be very transparent of what our interpretation is, and each person's interpretation of that is, because right now we have a lot of what we call sovereignty washing, where providers are always almost making up their own definition of sovereignty. But to answer your question, where I sit with it, and there's a few non-negotiables in my eyes. And there's a perfect world as well. And if we start with the perfect world, there's a number of aspects that in the supply chain that should be sovereign owned or controlled in that respect. So that could, that starts at the data center level, and you tend to go up the layers from there in terms of physical cables that go into the data centers from um, connectivity providers, from electricity companies. You've got the next layer up from that, which comes to the physical tin that gets installed, the servers, the networking that goes into those data centers, and where they come from and what chips are inside those. And then you start to move into the layers of the software and the operating systems that sit on top of those, and the software stack that sits on top of the operating system, and then up into the applications and the staffing. But probably most importantly as well, the actual jurisdiction in terms of from a legal perspective. Um, so there's many aspects to sovereignty, and I'm not sure there's anyone in the world that owns. Well, I'm pretty sure there's no one in the world that owns every single one of those layers. So, what we say at Civo is that if you take the UK, for example, we do operate our own data centers. Um, we we obviously don't manufacture our own servers and networking. Um, but we, in terms of the software stack and that sits on top of that hardware, we do own, and we built that from the ground up. And then we have our own UK staff. We're also a UK founded company, so the jurisdiction and the legal side of things is fully UK. So we're about as sovereign as you can possibly get in terms of the UK itself.
I think that's one of the challenges, isn't it? In that I went to in January, I went to a UK AI event in the House of Lords about sovereign AI, and as you were kind of saying, there are so many layers to it. No one could possibly claim that they are sovereign or sovereign AI in terms of solutions, models as well, in terms of kind of where are the models and who's kind of behind those. So in a sense, it is around interpretation and enough guarantee. I mean, it was interesting. One of the views expressed was, well, who owns the kill switch? Who can turn it off? Now, I guess in a I don't, what's the right phrase? Highly geopolitical world, then maybe sovereignty and sovereign AI is becoming ever more of a focus. It feels like it's becoming more of a focus this year, 2026. Is that fair? Are you seeing an increase in interest from your customers? Are they coming to you demanding more in this space?
Yes, definitely. I think recent events, geopolitically, I think everyone knows where we are in the world at the moment. There's a lot going on, and there's a lot of risks. And I think, a lot of this comes back to risk. And I think there's a lot of boardroom discussions that are happening right now where, um, companies are and executives are looking at their supply chain and seeing where they're exposed. And I think that's highlighting, the need for more sovereignty and the need to know that there's enough diversity in the supply chain as well. In terms of ultimately, I don't think any company or organization wants to be in a position where they're dependent on a single provider or a supply chain, a part of a supply chain where there's a single provider within it that can actually bring a company or some critical national infrastructure or something to its knees. And I think that's where it's all come from, and it's been driven by the geopolitical uncertainty that we have in the world right now.
How do you, given that uncertainty and recognizing that an assumed direction of travel that says most organizations are only going to want more AI capability, more compute power to be able to drive that. That suggests there's going to be increased demand for GPUs within the servers, etc. How are you beginning to think differently in terms of not only of how do you satisfy that immediate demand, but how do you kind of carve it out downstream as well?
Yeah, the technology is moving so fast right now, and you know, also we've got to fully appreciate and understand where we're at today. Right now, we all know that NVIDIA has a moat within the AI world in terms of the silicon and the chips that everyone's consuming, and the vast majority of what people want are from that NVIDIA ecosystem. But at the same time, things are moving from the training workloads to the inference of using those models, those brilliant models that lots of companies are creating. And it's not just about the large language models. There's a lots been done now on smaller models that are tuned to different industries and things. They're going to become critical in the future, and that inferencing that's close to the edge and local inferencing is going to become more and more important. And the requirements for the chips that power those are very different to the ones that we've been using over the last few years. And there are newer entrants coming in. There's even some UK startups that are beginnings of building chips. Even ARM last week, I think, announced their own. For the first time, they're actually going to make their own silicon rather than just licensing out their designs to other parties. They're going to make their own silicon for a AI accelerator chip of their own. So I think it's very fast moving. There's lots of change, and there are, I guess, going forward, more opportunities to build more sovereign supply chains. I think the EU in particular is doing a lot of work around this and de-risking from the big tech providers. And I think also saw a story where in Germany they've just announced that they're going to adopt the ODT document format and move away from the docx, the Word document format, to make sure that documents in the future are not under control of any one organization. So yeah, lots of things happening, and what we're doing at Civo is trying to ensure that we have as much of our supply chain in the local country jurisdiction as possible, which is challenging when we're at the same time trying to be a global provider. And maybe as a follow up question, we can cover that of how do we operate sovereignly in other countries.
We will absolutely come to that because I am fascinated by that tension almost. But let's stick with kind of what your customers are saying at the moment because I suppose my question is it I don't know 15 years ago we talked about the need for security. And then the thing that kind of I saw time and time again in the market was organizations going, yeah, but we can't afford that yet. So let's do that later. So we'll still kind of just do it kind of the base layer. So I guess my question is sovereign AI or sovereignty a bit like that at the moment in the sense that people may want that. They may know that that's kind of a good thing to have, but are they then actually paying for it too?
I think you're right. Yeah, I mean, 100%. What we've got to be doing right now, if you take the UK and the UK context for, but this is the same everywhere, is that you know we need to adopt hyperscale technologies. Who the hyperscale providers and also some of these emerging new, giant AI providers like Anthropic and Perplexity and OpenAI. They offer a lot of capability and they have a lot of capital and they're deploying infrastructure, very fast and AI capabilities very quickly. And if as a country we're going to move forward quickly, then we have to have those capabilities. But at the same time, it's really important that we don't completely disregard building domestic owned capabilities, that diversifies, as I mentioned, that you come back to that risk of all eggs all in one basket, diversing and God, is that word? Diversifying our risk in terms of that supply chain and just making sure that it's fully owned by the UK. So we're in control of our own destiny moving forward as well in that regard. And I think that to move towards a more of a multi-cloud, multi-vendor world, I think it's really important.
I mean, I I find myself being very reminded by my interoperability of the cloud days, because of course my
Yeah.
dreams, even going back to I don't know 2009 when I was kind of doing some of the early consulting work in that space. I mean, it's not there really, is it? I mean, the true interoperability between hosted environments. Well, I mean, the numbers don't show that it's just not happening.
No, definitely not. I think there was a survey done recently that I think only 1% of companies switch providers because it's so difficult, especially larger enterprises that have so much data, so much infrastructure embedded within, say, a hyperscale provider. Trying to move that to another provider is so difficult. And I talk about that a lot. That how have we got to this place? You know, right now where it's so hard to move because I think we're both of a similar age, maybe, that we remember the early parts of the internet when we used to have some HTML files, maybe a few PHP scripts, and we chose a hosting provider they were called back then, and you just FTP'd your files to your hosting provider, and your website appeared and your scripts run. And if for some reason you weren't happy with that provider, maybe their performance or uptime was poor, you were able to just take those same files and just FTP them to a different provider and off you go again. And you sort of fast forward 20, 25 years, on from that, and you think, well, how do we get to a place now where everything is so proprietary with each and every cloud provider that we can't do that anymore. The only sort of saving grace for that is Kubernetes and the cloud native ecosystem, which does offer some level of compatibility between cloud providers and some common APIs and things. And so certainly if you were born more into the cloud native world and you had a lot more of your workloads running on Kubernetes, you were able to move more seamlessly between providers. And the good thing about AI as well is that even NVIDIA themselves have said that Kubernetes is the future, if you like, operating system of AI. So that's certainly something that gives you a lot more autonomy and control over what you do if you did build in a cloud native way.
So one of the things that I wanted to go back to was speed of change because I mean, as you said, the technologies are changing all the time, especially in the AI space. So who is to say what we need next year or the year after or the year after that. And yet, of course, the realities of providing compute power at scale are that you need to plan to build a data center, and that takes time. I understand it takes less time now because the government, UK government's changed the planning regulations, recognizing the need to be more agile in that space. Then it takes time to build the data center, and then it takes time to provision it, by which time who knows what the requirements are. How do you go about planning for things that take naturally a few years to make happen when actually the things that are changing every month?
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge, and they are moving really, really quickly. I mean, we in GPU world, it wasn't so long ago we were thinking about maybe 20, 30 kilowatts in a rack of GPUs. And already we've moved into the Blackwell generation of NVIDIA GPUs that are more like 150 kilowatts per single rack. And then the next generation coming, the Vera Rubin generation is more like 500 kilowatts per rack. And NVIDIA already have on their roadmap GPUs that are going to be consuming 1 megawatt per rack. It wasn't that long ago that there was quite a lot of 1 megawatt data centers, and a 5 or 10 megawatt data center was a big, powerful data center. So things have changed very, very quickly, and designing for that level of change is tough. We're moving from air-cooled data centers to liquid-cooled data centers for these chips because they run so hot. There was some good news actually from NVIDIA, and when they announced the Rubin generation, is that they don't need to use chillers to actually help cool them, because they can run on warm water at 45 degrees. So that's actually a good sign for data centers that you don't need to have as much cooling, and that's obviously good for the environment, that we're not running electricity to manage cooling systems to cool GPUs down. But that's a new change. That only just got announced recently. So that everyone's going back to the drawing board, redesigning their data centers. Now we don't need chillers, and it all changes again. So it's certainly a challenge. But the way we're tackling that is in a modular way. It's really important that as you design data centers, that you can easily upgrade them for new technologies that come out. So designing in a modular deployment model, you can actually easily, as new technologies, say, so whether it's cooling or new power technologies or new rack technologies come along, you can easy retrofit by pulling out what you had and then plugging in the new system. So that's very, very important that they are upgradable for the future in that regard, and that future thinking has got to be baked into your business model, because we're saying 1 megawatt now, but it could be 2 megawatts tomorrow in that same rack.
I guess the thing that also makes me think, I mean, this last week or so, we've in our Futuria world of multi-agent teams, we've done a recursive implementation of an agent team that designs agent teams. So in a sense, kind of we're getting the AI capability to do the work in terms of accelerating the speed with which we can deploy. That must be happening in chip design and data center design as well. So it's not going to slow down, is it? It's only going to get faster in terms of that evolution. So it'd be interesting in terms of the set of skills that everyone will need going forward, being ever more around faster response times to kind of determine how to actually make happen what the designs and the market kind of comes up with next.
Yeah, 100%. I think I put a quote out on LinkedIn that I said that, you know, as good as AI is, that it obviously makes us move a lot faster. But if you move faster in the wrong direction, you go even deeper in the wrong direction. So there's still a big human element to that in terms of the planning and understanding, and the strategy relating to that. Because you could easily, in the context of what we just mentioned about data centers, if you've got a strong belief that there's a certain pathway that you're going down, and then you're using these brilliant AI models to help accelerate that, but you've chosen a non-modular approach, for example, and you're locked into that approach, you might have a brilliant, highly efficient data center with the best power usage effectiveness rating and all these kind of things. But then, yeah, you might have gone down the wrong route and should have gone modular, and that just wasn't picked up or something.
And I think I mean, there's a huge kind of point that's out there, isn't there, in terms of concern around sustainability and the environmental impact of the increased compute power needed as the models become ever more powerful, etc. And I think it's important to recognise that conversation in this conversation. I mean, I've always had a view that says that's a difficult thing to stop. As in, you can't just go, well, we're not going to do bigger models anymore. Sorry, kind of, we'll turn them off. But at the same time, surely we can, and it comes back to that recursive piece, surely we can kind of turn it in on how do we find more sustainable ways? How do we design more sustainable data centers? You had a great example earlier in terms of the chips changing so that you didn't need the chilling and the cooling kind of element. How important is that discussion in the conversations you have with your customers as well?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to be honest, it doesn't come up a lot at customer level. We're probably more innovating from their perspective on the software stack, the what they consume, the GPUs that we offer, and um, the complementary services that accompany those. And obviously a big one at the moment is time to first token. They want fast performance and things like that. I don't think our customers anyway are getting in at that lower level of, you know, to be honest, really caring how we operate data centers, and how we build our software. I think the sovereignty piece, yes, they are starting to ask questions around how that comes together, and what's the supply chain, and who's in that supply chain. And I think that's, really good questions to ask. Um, but I think in terms of the innovation that we're doing, and the future proofing that we're doing, is more something that we're doing internally rather than customers demanding that we have to be doing those kind of things. So it's
And,
where we're
and
at.
and I think that's fair in the sense that I mean it's the criticality of what's immediately visible as the sustainable business, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
that they need a service that enables them to operate in an efficient way. Um,
yeah.
but then there's a background conversation around, oh well, how can they kind of more broadly contribute to that conversation? Let's you said earlier on, let's go back to, and I'm keen to go back to sovereign AI, but in the context of different geographies. And I think when we first spoke, you said you were operating in the UK, the US, India, and Europe. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, I'm intrigued then, because I mean, you'll be dealing with international organisations as well that span those geographies, I'm imagining, and
Yeah.
and therefore you'll be dealing with one organisation that's maybe having to deal with lots of different definitions, and that'll complicate the service provision from yourselves. So I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that minefield.
Yeah, I mean, we operate currently in the US, India, Germany, for the EU regions, and the UK. And firstly of all, we've set up local companies in all of those jurisdictions. Um, I think one of the big differences with us versus the US company, hyperscale company, is that the UK doesn't have a law that like the US does in terms of the US Cloud Act, where there is a legal jurisdiction over the data that's held in foreign countries. Um, that doesn't exist as a UK founded company. So first of all, the UK government cannot demand that we suddenly pull data out of, say, Germany or out of India in that same regard. So that's one of the really big differences. It allows us to operate without that legal jurisdiction from the UK pulling data back inside. We do guarantee that the data stays within those countries and is resident to those countries at all times. Um, and then in terms of if people want true sovereignty, we're one of the few cloud providers that actually have or maybe the only cloud provider that has a private cloud solution that offers full feature parity with our public cloud solution. It's essentially the same thing. So people can actually, if they really want absolute guaranteed sovereignty, they can deploy private cloud environments into their country. Um, and that gives them the jurisdiction that they're managing their own cloud within their own environment, that isn't outside and there's no outside control in that regard. So that's a big difference from our side. Um, but it still comes down to some of the other, if it's again true sovereignty, the chips, the communication providers, the data centers, and the other parts that fit alongside that. One of the things we've been doing more recently is we've in Indonesia, we're launching a sovereign cloud with a partner, and that it's solely under their control, and we're licensing our software. And we have also, at the early stages of a number of countries, one in particular, which I can't name right now, but is a joint venture between ourselves and them, but with the majority of that joint venture ownership sitting with the local company, which is something that we're actually pushing for. We're saying that we don't want to take majority control of this company because we have to ensure that it best serves that country's users, companies, and people, and the control has to stay within that jurisdiction. So there's some of the things that we're doing to make sure that it's fair, open, transparent, and honest in the way it's controlled.
I really like that because, in a sense, it is very much considering maybe the restrictions that we've felt in the UK in terms of kind of the services that we're providing, but in their context, in their country, recognizing what their government might need for their government departments or citizen services. Do you find that that's landing well in the conversations that they are perhaps having with their customers? I mean, are you finding that? Because I'm going to come back to how you're finding it in the UK, in terms of the UK
Yeah.
consuming lots of kind of the larger US providers, and but how are you finding that conversation landing elsewhere?
I think rest of the world, if you take UK out of that for a moment, and you say rest of the world, which includes Europe, is huge on much bigger on sovereignty, generally speaking, than what the UK is. And that's what I'm saying in terms of countries like Indonesia coming to us saying they need to operate a sovereign cloud in that jurisdiction. We've had approaches you wouldn't be surprised from Canada, because Canada he's got a kind of a slightly fractured relationship with the US right now, and are moving away as much as they can in terms of the supply chain that they operate away from US companies. The EU is doing a lot, to make sure that they have control. Just announced, I know Mistral, the AI, lab that's out of France, have just announced that building a data center of their own for the first time. So they're adding to their supply chain. As I mentioned, you've got the new document format that's going to be adopted within Germany. You've got companies like Nextcloud, which are an alternative to Microsoft in terms of the document suite and Excel and things like that are pushing. I believe that the Austrian government is now going to move away from Microsoft in that regard. So I think what you're actually seeing away from the UK is even more movement away from the US hyperscale providers.
So let's finish then, perhaps with a view on the UK, and I guess kind of looking forward over the next kind of 1 to 2 years. What would you hope that is? I mean, I'm hearing lots of words, lots of positive discussions around the criticality of sovereign AI in the UK. Um, but I guess the question is following that through with actions. So I guess if you've got a shopping list of what you would like to see happen over the next year, what would it include?
Yeah, I think in the UK right now, the government's giving out very mixed messages. I think it's starting to change a little bit. Um, I think there's a lot of AI that's already been signed away to the hyperscalers at government level, and without any public tender for that kind of work. And I know Google has signed a deal to train all the government civil servants on AI. There's been deals done with OpenAI um, as well, and other organisations. Firstly, we need to stop that, and we need to change that. We need to have a lot more into procurement processes that are open and fair, And just it was announced last week that HMRC are moving to AWS out of all the data centers, and I think it's nearly $1 billion contract. And there was only one bidder for the contract, AWS, and it was really written in a way that didn't allow for any other companies to bid for it, but hyperscalers. So some real mixed messages coming out. But on the other hand, they've launched the sovereign AI investment fund that's been announced. And hopefully that is going to start championing UK founded sovereign businesses and doesn't just be used and given to the hyperscale providers. I don't think that's his intention, but we'll see what comes out of that. There was some announcements around procurement recently around SMEs getting a larger share of the cloud infrastructure as well. Um, we're not doing enough to look at AI models and UK founded foundational models. So that's something that needs to change, and there's not a lot of talk around that. So if we're going to own our own AI and destiny in the future, we do need to start looking at that and addressing that situation. And I always think with the UK, we've got arguably the best legal system in the world. Um, and you can imagine people using the likes of ChatGPT, and I'm sure everyone's guilty of it, where you're popping stuff in and asking legal advice and things like that. This is all trained on majority US law, and we need to make sure that we have things like UK law that's integral to the LLMs and things that we consume in this country, that's tuned to what we do as the best legal system in the world. So that's just one example of really we're disadvantaging ourselves by using very generalist models that are trained outside of the UK. We have brilliant researchers, top researchers in the UK, in the world, the top two universities that are in, I don't know, maybe in the top five in the world. Um, that are available to us, that can actually really bring some of this stuff to life, but we're not really doing much with that. Um, so I think that needs to change. It's really important that we start to build those foundational models.
Cool.
But they're
Um,
expensive. They're very expensive.
they
So we
are.
need GPUs. GPUs is the
They
issue to train them.
They are indeed. And I think echoing your point, I mean, I am seeing more discussion, more ideas, more debate being thrown around. Yes, there is a difference between that and the execution of it, but some of it is tricky, and the complexity of that fast-moving market, as we've talked about through the conversation, is difficult to navigate. Mark, thank you for coming and spending some time talking about sovereignty and sovereign AI and some of the challenges, not just in the UK, but all over the world. It's been great to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.